Welcome to my series, Surviving the Larapinta Trail. This is part 3, the water lesson, understanding water and water logistics. The Larapinta Trail is breathtaking, but it's also brutally dry. The trail winds through the West MacDonald Ranges, ridgelines exposed to full sun, gorges that trap heat, and long, rocky stretches with no shade. Even in winter, temperatures can soar above 30 degrees. Even in these cooler months, the dry air pulls moisture out of your body faster than you expect. Dehydration creeps in, and by the time you notice the symptoms, headaches, fatigue, it's already too late. This is why water planning is the #1 survival skill on the Larapinta. More hikers quit because of water mismanagement than because of medical issues, extreme weather, logistical failures, and physical strain or mental fatigue combined. Today, we'll explore how much to carry, where to find it, and how to treat it. The good news is, the backbone of the trail's water supply is a network of tanks. These are placed at most official trailheads and designated campsites, and when they're full, they provide drinkable water. But there's a catch. Tanks can run dry, especially late in the season. You should never assume a tank will have water waiting for you. These tanks are maintained by Parks and Wildlife, but always check the Larapinta Trail website or visitor centre to double check that all tanks are serviceable before you set out. The tanks are refilled by rangers, by a mix of remote monitoring that sends alerts when water levels fall below thresholds, and scheduled ranger checks and refills. Frequency depends on season and how many walkers are using the trail. This is why it's important you register your walk. However, refilled tanks are not guaranteed. Hikers still report occasional dry tanks in extreme seasons. Hikers should also record empty or low tank levels in trailhead logbooks and report leaks to rangers. And also, when on the trail, check with hikers going the opposite direction to you to make sure that the tank at the next trailhead has water. The tanks on the Larapinta are also spaced far apart. There is only one per section. However, it is recommended that some sections be completed in 2 days, so you either have to carry more water or find a natural water source along the way. So that's why planning your water resupply points carefully is critical. Tank water is generally safe, but you never know if it has been contaminated. Tanks can heat up under the intense Central Australian sun. Warm, stagnant water can promote algae, bacteria, or biofilm growth. If the lids or mesh aren't properly sealed, mosquitoes and other insects can breed inside the tanks, spreading bacteria and parasites. And while tanks are serviced, they can go long stretches without checks, especially in the remoter areas. Many hikers filter every drop, while others use chemical tablets or UV sterilizers. Boiling is effective, but it's also fuel intensive. A lightweight filter, less than 0.2 microns, is the most practical choice. It removes not only parasites and bacteria, but also particulates, which is especially important if you're getting water from natural water sources. When I was on the trail, I heard many stories of hikers suffering terrible digestive distress, diarrhea, cramping, and vomiting due to drinking untreated tank water, and several were forced to leave the trail. Don't take shortcuts. Clean water keeps you moving. And at camp, be mindful of your usage. Cooking, rehydrating meals, and having enough for drinking overnight and the following day all adds up. Most hikers carry about 8 litres away from each tank. And finally, respect the tanks. Don't wash dishes or clothes directly at them, don't leave rubbish nearby, and make sure the taps are properly closed. Every drop in those tanks is shared between hikers, and carelessness can ruin it for the next person. So remember, tank water is your lifeline on the Larapinta, but check reports, treat it, and carry extra for emergencies, and always respect the supply. Out here, water is survival, and those tanks are the reason thousands of people are able to experience this incredible trail every year. There are also natural water sources along the trail, but they are few and far between. Permanent waterholes exist at places like Ellery Creek Big Hole, Ormiston Gorge, Stanley Chasm, Hugh Gorge, and Red Bank Gorge. These are beautiful swimming spots as well as resupply points. Smaller creeks and gullies exist, such as Fringilly Creek and Waterfall Gorge, but they are unreliable and are often dry unless there has been rainfall during the winter months. And even if you do find a pool, it should always be filtered, boiled, or treated, as wildlife also depend on these waters. What looks like fresh water can be stagnant or contaminated. Section 8 and 9 are where a lot of hikers misjudge water needs. The sections with little to no natural water include Section 8, Serpentine Gorge to Serpentine Chalet Dam. It's 13 kilometres and mostly exposed, dry ridge country. Once you climb out of the gorge, you're committed to carrying everything until Chalet Dam. You'll only find a water tank at the end of each trailhead. Section 9, Serpentine Chalet Dam to Ormiston Gorge, is 29 kilometres and one of the longest and toughest sections. It also includes the climb up to Mount Giles Lookout. The terrain is long ridgelines, scrambles, and rocky ascent and descents. It's completely exposed. It has incredible 360-degree panoramic views, but is very physically demanding. Doing Section 9 in one day would be really tough, as would be camping at the Mount Giles Lookout, because you would have to carry all the water for an overnight dry camp. Section 9 requires careful planning. Many hikers describe it as one of the hardest water weight to terrain sections combined. We got lucky in that there was a lot of rainfall in the days prior to our departure, and there was a lot of water at Waterfall Gorge, which is roughly the halfway point, so we were able to resupply. Natural sources are best thought of as a bonus, not something you can plan your hike around. Local knowledge is vital. Rangers, fellow hikers, and up-to-date maps will tell you which tanks or semi-permanent waterholes or creeks have water in them and which you should skip. A quick chat on the trail can be life-saving. And even though there are water tanks and natural water sources, sometimes they run dry, or a section takes longer than you were expecting. Some hikers regret not carrying more water over certain stretches, or not planning a buffer day in the event that a tank or a natural water source is unusable. So how much should you carry? The short answer, more than you think. Between campsites, you might face 50 to 20 kilometres with no refill points. Each section varies in difficulty. Some sections are short, while others are long and remote. That means start each section with about 3 to 5 litres in your pack. But remember, every litre weighs a kilo, so water is the heaviest item you'll carry. So this also means that most of the time the tanks are your lifeline, and the distances between them dictate how much water you're going to have to carry. Some sections are manageable, but others are long and exposed and demand serious planning. But don't fall into the trap of carrying too much water just in case. By midday, you'll be moving like a pack horse, sweating twice as much because of the weight. Learn to trust the water tanks. But on the other hand, don't underestimate the heat and leave camp with only 1 or 2 litres, or you could end up dry and dizzy. The lesson? Find the balance. Carry enough, but plan smart. And how you carry water matters too. The key is to spread the weight and stay flexible. Many hikers use a hydration bladder with a hose for easy sipping. The bladder sits close to your back, keeping the heaviest weight centered. The drinking hose makes it easier to sip constantly rather than gulping at rest stops, which keeps you better hydrated. But bladders can puncture or leak, hoses can split, and it's hard to keep track of just exactly how much you've drunk. And if your water supply is in one system, that's a risky gamble. Others prefer Nalgene bottles, durable and simple. They double as measuring cups for rehydrating meals, and they're much easier to refill and treat at tanks or creeks. The trick is to spread water across multiple containers, Nalgene bottles and bladders. That way, if one leaks, you don't lose everything. Another trick is to color code bottles. One for water, one for electrolyte mix. Electrolytes are essential out here. Sweating all day means you're not just losing water, but also salts. Without replacement, you risk cramps and heat exhaustion. Another tip is accessibility. Keeping at least one bottle where you can reach it without having to take off your pack. That way, when you're slogging up a rocky climb, you're never tempted to wait until later. Out here, later can mean dizziness, headaches, or worse. Many hikers like to camp at high camps rather than at section trailheads. High camps include Brinkley Bluff, Stewart's Pass, Counts Point Ridge, Mount Giles Lookout, Hermit's Hideaway, and Hilltop Lookout. There are no tanks at these high camps, but they do offer some incredible panoramic views. We walked west from Mount Sonder to Alice Springs, and we stayed at 2 high camps, Hilltop Lookout and Brinkley Bluff. When we left Red Bank Gorge to camp at Hilltop, we stopped at Rocky Bar Gap, which was 14 kilometres in, to refill water. From Rocky Bar Gap, it's only a steep 3-kilometre ascent up to Hilltop Lookout. We were fresh, it was our first day hiking with full packs, and we only had to carry the additional water, 4 litres for me and 6 litres for Leo, 3 kilometres. So it wasn't too difficult. But that final slog up to the lookout in the heat of the day was tough. It's super exposed and just really, it's a scree slope. So it did take a lot of scrambling. And the next day, it was 10 kilometres, mostly downhill, to the Fink River trailhead where we were able to resupply. We then pushed on the last 9 kilometres to Ormiston Gorge, where we had a drop box and a kiosk waiting for us. We also didn't find it too difficult the day we camped at Brinkley's Bluff. We left section 4-5 junction heading east with all the water we would need to get us to Brinkley Bluff, camp overnight, and get to Stanley Chasm the following day. There was no water on the trail. It was about 8 kilometres to Brinkley, and heading east, it was a gradual ascent up onto the Chewing Ranges ridgeline. The trail is rocky and very exposed, but once you reach the top, it's incredible. The next morning, we had a 10-kilometre hike down to Stanley Chasm. The first part was the descent off the ridge, followed by an undulating rocky trail down into the chasm. We didn't have much food at this point because we had a drop box waiting and a kiosk to purchase cold drinks, so it wasn't too hard, but we did have to ration our water. So if you're heading west, this day might be more tough. The climb is steeper and you have just resupplied. Additionally, most people delay departure to have the famous pancake breakfast, so you're making that climb in the midday sun. So on section 9, leaving Ormiston Gorge eastbound en route to Serpentine Chalet Dam, we would have loved to have camped at the Mount Giles Lookout or Hermit's Hideaway high camps. But heading east, water logistics were an issue, and we would have had to carry too much over long stretches with steep ascents and descents and exposed terrain. We decided to do section 9 in 2 days and bypass the high camp, and we camped at Waterfall Gorge. Waterfall Gorge campsite is very remote. It's a basic bush campsite with 2 small rocky tent sites. There's no tank water, but it had rained a few days prior, and intel from hikers heading west told us that Waterfall Gorge had a good supply of water. So we broke up the section by camping there, and it also meant we didn't have to carry as much water. There have been rescues on the Larapinta Trail linked to dehydration as a result of water mismanagement. These incidents underscore just how critical water planning is and carrying an emergency device when hiking in remote desert terrain. The sections around Stanley Chasm and the Hugh Gorge corridor come up repeatedly in rescues. It's a combination of getting off route, the high heat, and insufficient water. That's the common pattern. On the 24th of August 2024, Northern Territory Police reported a pair of rescue operations on the Larapinta Trail. One involved a 33-year-old man who was overdue after deviating from the main trail. He had intended to hike from Stanley Chasm to Miller's Flat via an alternative southern route. However, he became disorientated and ran out of water. A search over 134 square kilometres was conducted, and a helicopter eventually located and rescued him. He did not have a PLB. A paramedic on board was able to provide initial first aid for dehydration. And later that same day, a 40-year-old solo hiker had intended to walk from Simpson's Gap to Stanley Chasm. However, she took several wrong turns, got lost, and couldn't find her way back to the trail. She ran out of water and activated her PLB. Search and Rescue deployed a helicopter to her location, about 5 kilometres northeast of Stanley Chasm, and located her. She was mildly dehydrated and didn't require medical attention. Now, I did the trail beginning the 29th of May 2024. While I was on the trail, there was a search and rescue operation. However, this was a much more tragic case. The body of a 64-year-old solo hiker was discovered near Hugh Gorge. He had been missing for some days. And while the cause of death is under investigation, the proximity to a waterhole has led to speculation about dehydration or water access as contributing factors. The Larapinta Trail teaches you respect for the land, for your limits, and most of all for water. Plan your sections carefully. Check tank reports. Carry what you need and treat every drop. Done right, you'll stay safe and strong, able to fully enjoy the sweeping ridgelines and cool desert nights. Out here, water isn't just hydration, it's freedom. Pack it wisely, and the trail will reward you with an unforgettable journey.